The natural world is full of the most amazing materials. Tougher than steel, finer than our best optics. And how nature builds with these materials is even more extraordinary. In the last few years, scientists have begun to look at nature with new eyes. And what they're finding promises new materials. Warmer, smarter, stronger, more eco-friendly. Technology working with nature to build a new and unexpected world. For thousands of years, people have been making use of nature's raw materials. In the early days, we relied on them for our homes, our clothes, just about everything. But humans aren't the only creatures to use natural building materials. Here in northern Namibia, a pair of hornbills have used mud to make their nests secure. The female has been sealed into the nest hole behind a wall of mud, leaving just a small gap, big enough for her mate to pass food to her, but small enough to keep out all predators. Mud is a really popular choice when it comes to building. Throughout the tropics, colonies of termites use mud to produce complex nests, some standing up to 3 meters tall, full of intricate tunnels and chambers. To create these incredible structures, termites mix different types of mud to do different jobs. Mud mixed with saliva and feces dries to create an outer wall as strong as concrete. People have also been using mud for centuries and have found, like termites, that mud mixed with various other substances produces building materials with different properties. It's a versatile building material, and it's been used to create some extraordinary things. The Great Mosque in Jannah, in Mali, the world's biggest structure made of mud bricks. This impressive building is made of sun-dried mud bricks held together with a mud mortar, then coated with a plaster of smooth mud. The mosque is nearly 100 years old and will last for centuries more if properly maintained. The Malians and termites hit on the same solutions to building by trial and error. But when biomimetic scientists look at natural materials, they're hoping not just to copy nature, but to understand the basic principles behind nature's success and build on that to invent completely new materials. And that's exactly what's happened with wood, an even more versatile material than mud. Wood is made of long, tough fibers and is used by wasps to make their nests. Chewed to a pulp and mixed with saliva, they turn it into a kind of cardboard. It's tough, it's good insulation. In short, an excellent building material. And the wasps are surrounded by it. Wood is everywhere, just for the taking. Which is why it's been so useful to us. It's been used for everything, from Stone Age monuments, to houses and bridges, to carts and boats. It's not surprising that wood was the foundation of our world. Unlike mud, wood is a complex, sophisticated material. It has to be, because it supports nature's largest structures. On the slopes of the Sierra Nevada mountains in California are the biggest organisms ever to have lived. These sequoias tower up to 80 meters above the forest floor, though some reach as high as 100 meters. These massive trees weigh around 1,400 tons, and each one contains enough timber to build 120 houses. It's taken them more than 2,000 years to get to this size, and that's only possible because wood is such an amazing material. The fibers that make up wood are long, tiny, hollow tubes that carry water from the roots to the leaves, the tree's plumbing system. Wound around the tubes in a helical pattern, tiny fibers of cellulose are embedded in a kind of resin. It's this arrangement that gives wood such amazing properties. In particular, this structure makes wood very resistant to cracking, crucial if a tree isn't to lose its branches in every storm. If the force on a branch is enough to start a crack, the crack just runs around the spiral fibers, which absorb its energy and stop it spreading any further. This makes wood very hard to crack, which is why we still use it today as a building material. But can we do better than nature? At the University of Reading in the UK, scientists are studying wood's performance in detail. Different kinds of wood are tested to destruction. Driven by a high-pressure air system, a metal rod is rammed into a block of wood, as the scientists identify which kinds of woods are the strongest. Based on their results, they came up with a revolutionary new material, a kind of artificial wood. It's made from resin with fibers running through it, and so mimics the pattern of wood, with many of its tough properties. So much so, it's one of the toughest materials ever made. It's yet to be put to practical use, but it's strong enough to make bulletproof armor. But wood is more than just tough. It can also be smart. Like the wood in tree trunks, the woody scales of pine cones are made of stiff fibers embedded in a resinous substance. But these fibers lie in different directions in the top and bottom layers. When the scales dry out, the bottom layer shrinks more than the top, which makes the cone open and release its seeds. One designer is looking at a clothing fabric that works in the same way. As the fabric starts to get damp from sweat, sections of the fabric lift up to provide ventilation. This is true biomimetic thinking, not merely using natural materials, but understanding how they work and applying the principle somewhere else. But this kind of thinking isn't entirely new. Natural designs inspired some of the Victorian age's greatest architecture. In 1849, botanist Joseph Paxton had to build a new and bigger greenhouse for his ever-expanding Victoria lilies. These plants produce enormous leaves, up to 2 meters across. Hence Paxton's problem. But those same leaves held the solution to his problem. They're supported by a complex series of ridges and struts, and Paxton saw he could use the same arrangement to support a large roof span over his new greenhouse. He showed just how strong these leaves were in a most unusual way. They can easily cradle a baby. Paxton was so confident of the leaf strength, he entrusted his young daughter to this Victorian equivalent of a waterbed. And when full-sized, these leaves can even support the weight of an adult. He built his greenhouse on these bio-inspired principles. And it was so successful that he went on to build even bigger structures, like the magnificent Crystal Palace. Built in London for the first World's Fair in 1851, the Crystal Palace was a technological marvel of glass and iron, 33 meters high and covering about 7 hectares, all thanks to a plant from the depths of the Amazon rainforest. What the lily shows is that it's not just the material used that makes it tough. It's also the details of how it's constructed. And that's equally true of the materials that make up animals. When the fall comes to the Rocky Mountains of North America, nature puts on a dramatic demonstration of one of her most remarkable materials. At this time of year, male elk gather up groups of females ready to mate, but they have to defend these harems from rivals. For that purpose, nature has provided them with tough antlers made of bone. Despite energetic wrestling, broken antlers are very rare. But bone is heavy, so nature is as economical as possible. Inside, bones are partly hollow, but filled with a complex network of arches and spans. This beautiful hidden structure is also elegant engineering. The bony struts are laid down along lines of stress in the bone, so it's strongest where it feels the biggest loads. It's as strong as it can be, but using the minimum of material. Even our own skeletons can be a source of inspiration. The human thigh bone, or femur, is especially elegant. The head of the bone is off to one side, which means the weight of the body has to be transferred, first sideways, then down the length of the bone. Struts of bone arch through the head of the femur, transferring this weight both effectively and economically. And architects realized they could apply exactly these principles in constructing tall buildings. It's the inspiration behind one of the most famous buildings in the world, the Eiffel Tower. Gustav Eiffel used the structure of the human thigh bone in building his 300-meter tower, the tallest building in the world until 1930. Like the curve in the head of the femur, the famous iron curves of the Eiffel Tower are supported by a latticework of metal struts and girders that transfer the tower's weight sideways and down to the ground, just as elegantly as the internal struts of bone. In recent years, more and more designers and engineers are looking at the way nature builds bodies and getting inspiration for everything from new bridges and buildings to cars. Cars need to be tough, but can't be too heavy or they burn too much fuel. Nature faces the same problem, which is why both animals and plants only lay down material precisely where they need it. So this car-shaped fish, the boxfish, might be a good model for an economic car. And when the engineers at Daimler Chrysler designed a chassis using a computer program that, like the boxfish, laid down more material where the loads were greatest, they found they'd made their lightest, strongest chassis ever. For vertebrates, like fish, mammals and birds, the skeleton gets its strength from the material of bone and the way it's constructed. Vertebrates are built around the outside of these internal bony struts, a system that works well for the biggest animals, like these moas, giant extinct birds. But there are other types of skeleton. Insects are the other way round. Their skeleton is on the outside, an exoskeleton. An insect is hung from the inside of a tough protective casing, the optimum engineering solution for small creatures. Bones are strengthened with deposits of heavy calcium phosphate, but tiny insects can't afford so much weight. Natural selection has had to come up with a lightweight solution, a structure made of fibers of a substance called chitin, embedded in a matrix. Like plywood, each layer of fibers runs at a slightly different angle, making the exoskeleton very strong in every direction. Tough enough for male stag beetles to use their jaws like the antlers of an elk, wrestling with each other over females. Other insects use their jaws for their original purpose, for eating. Locusts eat grass, lots of grass. Grass leaves are protected by tiny crystals of silica which wear away most substances. But the jaws of a locust can cope. And before they're in danger of wearing out, a young locust can replace them by shedding its whole outer casing. Insect cuticle is remarkable stuff. So what can we do with it? First, we need more than we can get from tiny insects. But on the east coast of North America, a huge supply of chitin crawls out of the water onto the beach every spring. Horseshoe crabs are not insects, but neither are they crabs. They're primitive creatures related to spiders that have swarmed onto beaches to spawn like this for hundreds of millions of years. But like insects, their shells are strengthened with chitin fibers. They were collected for their shells, but over-collecting has reduced their population. Not a good way to work hand in hand with nature. Fortunately, the eastern seaboard of the United States offers up another chitin bounty. And most of this is going to be thrown away. A much better source. Crab factories around North America's Chesapeake Bay extract the valuable meat for canning, but the shells themselves could be just as valuable. The shells of crabs also contain lots of chitin, but it's bound up with calcium carbonate. However, by treating the shells with acid, this can be dissolved, releasing the chitin for use. By purifying the chitin and chemically altering the fibers, a substance called chitosan can be made. In its purest form, it's used to make contact lenses, skin creams, and wound dressings. But chitosan can also fill many of the purposes of plastic. And even better than plastic, it's biodegradable. But smashing up this amazing substance and converting it into a bioplastic may not be the best way of exploiting its potential. An insect's exoskeleton is a marvel of microengineering and almost endlessly versatile. It can be shaped to resemble a leaf with amazing accuracy, living or dead. Even down to the holes chewed by other insects. The level of detail is extraordinary. Hidden in this orchid flower is an orchid mantis. Its body and legs are sculpted and colored to match the petals of the flower exactly. It's virtually invisible to its predators and to its prey. But look even closer, and the insect's body armor is even more astounding. Molded and shaped with microscopic precision into a huge variety of shapes. And it's not just there to admire. Each of these microscopic landscapes has a job to do. These tiny bumps cover the body of a beetle that lives in the Namib Desert. In this parched desert, it hardly ever rains, yet beetles seem to flourish here. Their only supply of water is the fog that rolls in from the ocean every morning. So the beetles start each day by climbing to the top of a dune, where they can intercept the fog blowing in on the wind. Those microscopic bumps help water condense on their bodies. The tips of the bumps attract water, while the channels between repel it. This forces the water to form droplets which run down to the beetle's mouth. A desert survival strategy that might help with all too frequent water crises in the human world. One company is now designing tents for refugees that work in the same way. These tents could condense water from the air each morning, even in areas where groundwater is in short supply. In this case, understanding how a desert beetle lives could make all the difference between life and death for these people. And all this comes from the extraordinary design of insect skeletons. Yet this whole complex structure is shed and replaced every time the insect molts, which seems something of a waste. Insects can afford to do this because the arrangement of chitin fibers is self-assembled. When the right components come together in the right way, the exoskeleton just builds itself. And this kind of self-assembly process is very interesting to biomimetic engineers. Crystals are a simple example of self-assembling structures. The final shape of a crystal is not due to some elegant overall design. It happens because the atoms or molecules naturally come together in a lattice that, as it grows, results in these familiar shapes. More complex molecules can self-assemble into more complex shapes. If we could control the way the component parts of a material interact, we could just mix them together, sit back, and watch the most complex of designer materials just build themselves. Impossible? Nature does it all the time. One impressive example can be seen off the coast of California. Here, sea otters seem to live an idyllic life, floating on a gently rolling ocean. And when they're hungry, all they need to do is dive down to the ocean floor and pick up a tasty shellfish. But it's not that easy. Shellfish have tough shells, so tough that sea otters have to resort to a clever trick. They hammer the clam on a stone balanced on their chests, and eventually they'll get their reward. As smart as the sea otter's trick looks, it's the discarded shells that are really interesting. Why did it take so much effort for the sea otter to get its meal? After all, these shells are just made up of calcium carbonate, ordinary chalk. And that's not tough at all. The secret is in how mollusks arrange the crystals of calcium carbonate. A shell is made up of several layers, but the iridescent inner mother-of-pearl layer, the nacre, is the really spectacular part. Magnifying the shell thousands of times reveals an intricate structure. Flat crystals of calcium carbonate sitting in a matrix of protein. If one crystal cracks, the crack simply runs into the protein, which is just stretched, absorbing the energy. Eventually, the protein matrix will absorb all the crack's energy and stop it dead. But the protein does more than just stopping cracks from spreading. It's responsible for the precise way in which the crystals are laid down. As the mollusk grows its shell, it secretes these proteins, which form a layer over its body. As calcium carbonate is secreted into this layer, the proteins make sure it crystallizes in just the right way to form nacre. Nacre is a kind of ceramic, a tough, non-metallic structure made up of tiny crystals. Humans have been making their own ceramics for thousands of years. Pottery, for example, is also a ceramic. And apart from pots, we now use ceramics as engine parts or even tank armor. But when we make ceramics, we have to heat them to perhaps 1400 degrees centigrade. Nature makes its ceramics at sea temperature. And what it can do is truly spectacular. And these ceramics, made by humble mollusks, are twice as strong as anything we can make. Such natural flamboyance gave scientists the idea of isolating the proteins responsible for organizing the way nacre is laid down. Then, by changing them, they hope to be able to grow all kinds of intricate structures. Perhaps even computer chips more powerful than any that can be made by today's methods. In the freezing cold of the high Arctic, it's not strength, but warmth that's needed. Polar bears are cozy even in sub-zero temperatures. Seen with an infrared camera, the brightest areas are those losing heat, which for the polar bear is mainly its nose. The rest of its body is extremely well insulated, apart from the tips of its toes. In the snowy wastes, it's almost as well camouflaged in infrared as it is in ordinary light. The polar bear's high Arctic survival gear is its fur. Each hair is transparent and hollow, and it used to be thought that this conducted the sun's heat down to the skin. Polar bear skin is black, which absorbs this heat. Now scientists are not so sure, but it was a good idea nevertheless. So scientists at the Institute for Textile Technology at Denkendorf in Germany have developed an artificial polar bear fur that does work in this way, by conducting infrared and ultraviolet radiation down to a black base layer. These fibers on their own are not as good at insulation as polar bear fur, but a transparent layer on top improves the overall performance by trapping a layer of warm air. Wrapped around a water container, this material can warm the water just by conducting the sun's heat, even though it appears this isn't how polar bears do it. The more we look at the microscopic detail of nature's structures, the more we find they can do. All the plants in a tropical rainforest depend on these torrential downpours for survival. But they can also create problems. The rain washes down dirt, which could coat the leaves and block out light. Worse, wet leaves will soon grow a layer of mold in this warm, humid environment. Some rainforest plants have drip tips, designed to drain water off the leaf. But some just don't seem to get wet at all, no matter how much it rains. This is the most spectacular, a lotus leaf. Slow down more than 100 times, it's clear that the water just bounces off the leaf. The water can't spread out and wet the leaf. Instead, it just reforms droplets that bounce across the leaf until they fall off. Again, the secret is in the microscopic detail of the lotus leaf. Its surface is covered in tiny bumps, each of which is capped by a waxy layer. The caps repel water, forcing it to perch on the very tips of the microscopic bumps. Unable to reach the leaf's surface, all the water can do is roll back into a sphere. And since it's repelled by the tiny bumps, there's nothing to stop it rolling off the leaf. But even more impressive, the water drops pick up any particles of dirt on the leaf's surface and carry them off as well. So lotus leaves are always immaculately clean. A reason why they're a symbol of purity in Eastern religions. And it's too good a trick for science to miss. This fabric has all the water-repelling qualities of a lotus leaf. To make it means first weaving a strong, dense material. The material is then run through a machine that coats it with a substance that's still a closely guarded secret. As it dries, this coating produces millions of microscopic bumps over the surface of the material that work in the same way as those on a lotus leaf, making a material that is not only water repellent, but self-cleaning. And there's already a self-cleaning paint based on the same principle. Ordinary paint soon gets dirty. But dirt and water just roll off this new paint, called Lotusan. And a similar coating over this spoon means simple, pure water will pick up any dirt and leave the spoon totally clean. The surface, developed at the University of Bonn in Germany, even repels something as sticky as honey, which just runs off like water. Won't it be great when the self-cleaning shoe is invented? Repelling water is the key to good waterproofing. And both people and nature have invented many ways of doing this. We use fabrics coated in water-repellent oils. And many birds do the same. Spreading a layer of oil over their feathers, which means the water just runs off like, well, water off a duck's back. So ducks would be the obvious place to look for improvements in waterproofing. But in biomimetics, it's not always the obvious places that are the best. Hidden beneath the surface of a South American stream, a strange spider has a novel way of waterproofing itself. These spiders prey on small fish in mountain streams, and underwater, they trap a silvery layer of air around their bodies. But when they emerge from the water, they're completely dry. Researchers at the University of Bonn in Germany have been trying to unlock the spider's secrets. The spiders are covered in bristles, and it turns out that the spacing and three-dimensional arrangement of these bristles is critical in giving the spider its extreme waterproof coat. The scientists here have measured the exact spacing of these hairs, as well as looking at the intricate microscopic architecture of the individual hairs. Using these findings, researchers have developed an ultra-waterproof fabric. As a test, it was submerged in water for 4 days and still emerged bone dry. Staying dry is certainly not a problem faced by the sandfish. This lizard lives in the most inhospitable parts of North African and Middle Eastern deserts. Bare, sandy dunes. It's called the sandfish because when it feels threatened, it can dive into the sand. It's able to swim through the dunes as if they were water, which is surprising since moving through sand should take a lot more energy than moving through water. So scientists from the Technical University of Berlin decided to take a closer look at this ability. They found the sandfish's skin had lower friction than glass or even polished steel. The sand just rolls off it. And it's not at all obvious how it performs this trick. Its shovel-shaped head certainly helps, but its ability to swim through sand seems to rely mainly on its remarkable skin. Magnified more than 25,000 times, a series of tiny spikes appears along the edge of every scale, each just a few millionths of a millimeter long. Somehow, these structures must reduce the friction between the grains of sand and the skin, though quite how is still not clear. And even stranger, these tiny structures just don't seem to get worn away by the sand. One possibility is that the spikes conduct static electricity, stopping the lizard from charging up as it rubs through the sand grains, and therefore stopping the sand grains sticking to its skin. Nature's microstructures might hold the secrets to better waterproofing or non-stick surfaces, but they might also hold the secrets to the next generation of computers. A new information revolution. A story that starts with a spectacular rainforest butterfly. The bright blue of a morpho butterfly shines out like a beacon in the rainforest. It can be seen half a kilometer away. Exactly what the butterfly wants, to attract a mate. But the wings of these butterflies contain no pigments. They produce color in the same way that soap bubbles do. These shimmering colors are caused by light being reflected from the outside and inside surface of the bubble and change with the angle of viewing. But the color of a morpho is far more intense than a soap bubble. And the reason is down to the microarchitecture of each and every tiny wing scale. The morpho uses these colors for display, to make itself conspicuous. And it's certainly been noticed by scientists. At Exeter University in the United Kingdom, they've been examining the morpho's microarchitecture down to the finest detail. Each scale is covered in ridges, and each ridge is made of layers of cuticle. These layers are separated by a distance that is the same as the wavelength of blue light, and so when sunlight bounces off each of these layers, only the blue light is reflected back. And the exact spacing of the layers means successive waves of blue light interfere with each other, reinforcing themselves and intensifying the color. To make it easier to see what's happening, the Exeter scientists then built a model of this structure that will work with microwaves that have a much longer wavelength than light. And what they found was that the gaps in the ridges on the wing scales are structured in such a way that no light gets trapped. It's all reflected, which adds to the brilliance of the color. It's hard to believe that there isn't a single molecule of pigment in these scales. Japanese manufacturers have incorporated these ideas into fabric, material they call Morphotex, made up of nylon and polyester arranged in the same way as the layers of cuticle in a morpho's wing scale. Morphotex shimmers with interference colors that will never fade, and cosmetics companies are already developing lipstick with the same effect. But the morpho's lesson is even more profound. Each scale is, in fact, a photonic crystal, a device that can transmit light, the optical equivalent of a transistor. Transistors revolutionized electronics and powered the computer revolution. Photonic crystals could power a new information revolution of even faster, more energy-efficient optical computing. And nature might well be able to point the way. With this new way of seeing the world, the possibilities are endless. Modern technology has already created a whole range of new materials based on nature's examples. But sometimes nature is still one step ahead. Spider silk is an extraordinary material, size for size, stronger than steel. But it's also highly elastic. It's made from strands of different proteins, and spiders can produce different kinds of silk depending on their need. It's stored as a liquid and solidifies into strands as it's squirted out through tiny nozzles on the spider's rear end. Yet we've never been able to copy this. Artificial spider silk is still a holy grail for biomimeticists. We'll probably succeed one day, but watching a spider spin these beautiful structures is a good reminder that it'll take some time to catch up with 4 billion years of evolution. The natural world is built from amazing materials. But the structures that nature produces with these materials are just as intriguing. And they hold lessons in how to manage energy efficiently and cleanly. Lessons that, at the start of the 21st century, humanity urgently needs to learn. In the next program, we'll see how nature's use of energy can offer ways to solve our energy crisis, and how information systems, more sophisticated than any we've imagined, give our computer revolution new and unexpected directions.